The cowboy ate alone for 12 years, until a black bride sat down without asking, her wedding dress rustling like thunder in the stunned saloon silence. Patrons sneered and whispered cruel jokes about the foolish woman who traveled hundreds of miles to marry a dead man. They assumed she'd crawl away in shame by morning, another broken dreamer swallowed by the unforgiving frontier. But the silent giant in the corner booth, the hermit who hadn't spoken to another soul in over a decade, watched her with haunted eyes that held dangerous secrets. Her letters had been his only light through years of crushing guilt, and now her presence threatened to unearth the buried truth about why he'd retreated from the world. Will her courage destroy them both, or finally set him free? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The dust never settled in Millbrook Creek. It hung in the air like broken promises, coating everything in the color of disappointment. The town had been dying for years, bleeding people, and hope in equal measure. Samuel Calhoun sat at his corner table in Beauregard's saloon, same as he had every day for 12 years. The locals called him Boomer, though none remembered why. His massive frame filled the rickety chair, shoulders hunched over a plate of beans and cornbread. Always the same meal, always alone. The saloon buzzed with its usual afternoon crowd. Margaret Grange held court at the center table, her silver hair pinned in perfect ringlets despite the frontier setting. She spoke in honeyed tones about proper society, about maintaining standards in an uncivilized land. The other women hung on her every word like gospel. Jacob Beauregard wiped down glasses behind the bar, his weathered hands moving in practiced circles. He'd owned the saloon for 15 years, watching the town slowly crumble around him. His eyes often drifted to Boomer's table, wondering what tragedy had carved such deep lines into that stone face. The stagecoach horn echoed through the dusty streets. Jacob glanced up. Thursday's stage wasn't due until evening. Margaret's conversation stopped mid-sentence. Through the grimy windows, they could see a woman stepping down from the coach. She wore a white wedding dress, now gray with travel dust. Her dark skin gleamed with perspiration in the harsh afternoon sun. The saloon doors swung open. Eliza Montgomery stepped inside, clutching a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon. Her chin was raised, but her hands trembled slightly. She scanned the room with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Margaret's lips pursed into a thin line. Several men snickered into their whiskey glasses. Women whispered behind gloved hands, their voices carrying just enough to sting. Eliza walked directly to Boomer's table. She pulled out the empty chair and sat down without a word. The entire saloon fell silent. Boomer's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. For 12 years, no one had dared approach his table. No one had even tried. He stared at this woman who had shattered his carefully maintained isolation with a single, bold action. Margaret rose from her chair like a queen addressing peasants. Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to obedience. "Miss, I believe you're lost. That gentleman prefers his privacy." Eliza's gaze never wavered from Boomer's face. She placed the letters on the scarred wooden table between them. "I'm here to see Thomas Whitmore. These letters promised me marriage and a new life." The snickers turned to outright laughter. Someone in the back shouted out that Thomas had been dead 3 years, killed in a riding accident. The laughter grew crueler, more pointed. Here was entertainment better than any traveling show. Eliza's face didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Pain, perhaps, or determination. Boomer set down his fork. His voice came out rusty from disuse, barely above a whisper. "I wrote those letters." The laughter died instantly. Margaret stepped closer, her skirts rustling like snakeskin. Her voice carried a warning that everyone in the room understood. "Samuel, surely you're mistaken. Poor Thomas handled his own correspondence before his unfortunate passing." Boomer's massive hands clenched on the table. 12 years of silence pressed against his chest like a physical weight. But looking into Eliza's face, seeing the hope and terror warring in her expression, something cracked inside him. "Found your first letter in Thomas's things after the accident. It was addressed to any good man seeking a wife. You wrote about wanting to teach children, about building something meaningful. His voice grew stronger with each word, as if speaking was a muscle he was remembering how to use. Your letters gave me something to look forward to. Never meant for you to come, never meant to deceive anyone. Eliza absorbed this revelation with surprising calm. Around them, the saloon buzzed with whispered shock and cruel speculation. Margaret's face had gone pale beneath her powder. So I've traveled 800 miles to marry a dead man, corresponding with a stranger who never intended to meet me. Boomer nodded miserably. Eliza stood slowly, smoothing her dusty wedding dress. Every eye in the saloon followed her movement. Margaret smiled with satisfaction, already composing the story she would spread about the foolish woman who thought she could find happiness in their town. But Eliza didn't head for the door. Instead, she turned to face the entire room. Her voice carried a strength that made several people lean back in their chairs. Then I'll make my own way. This town needs a school. I'm educated, certified, and ready to teach any child whose parents want them to learn. Margaret's smile vanished. She stepped forward, her voice sharp as broken glass. We have standards here, girl. Certain ways of doing things that have served us well. Eliza met her gaze steadily. Something passed between the two women. A recognition of opposing forces that would not easily coexist. I'm sure you do, and I'm sure some of those ways need changing. Boomer watched this exchange with growing fascination. This woman possessed a courage he had lost years ago. She stood in the face of hostility and prejudice with her spine straight and her purpose clear. Margaret's eyes narrowed to calculating slits. She had built her influence in this town brick by careful brick. She would not let some outsider tear it down. The question hung in the air between them, unspoken but understood by everyone present. Would Millbrook Creek bend to accommodate change, or would it break the woman brave enough to demand it? 3 days passed before Eliza found suitable lodging. The boarding house refused her outright. The hotel claimed to be full despite empty rooms. She finally secured a small room above the general store, paying twice the usual rate. Word of her school proposal spread through Millbrook Creek like wildfire. Reactions split the town down in visible lines. Some families whispered interest behind closed doors. Others voiced loud opposition in public squares. Margaret Grange wasted no time organizing resistance. She visited every respectable household, speaking in concerned tones about maintaining proper educational standards. Her message was clear without being direct. Some influences were dangerous to impressionable young minds. Eliza spent her mornings searching for a suitable location. Most buildings were either occupied, too expensive, or suddenly unavailable when she inquired. The few property owners willing to negotiate changed their minds after visits from Margaret's circle. Jacob Beauregard watched these developments from behind his bar. His saloon occupied a central position in town politics. He heard everything, said little, and kept his opinions carefully hidden. Business depended on staying neutral, but neutrality became harder to maintain when Eliza entered his establishment on Thursday afternoon. She approached his bar directly, ignoring the hostile stares from other patrons. I need space for a schoolroom. I can pay fair rent. Jacob continued polishing glasses. Several conversations stopped around them. Margaret's friends leaned forward to catch every word. Don't have much call for schools and a drinking establishment. Eliza's voice remained steady despite the mounting tension. You have that storage room upstairs. It's been empty for years. Jacob's hand stilled. She was right. The room had collected dust since his wife passed. He'd originally planned it as living quarters, but could never bring himself to use it after her death. Margaret's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Jacob, surely you wouldn't want to compromise your establishment's reputation. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Margaret controlled significant influence among his customer base. Opposing her could mean financial ruin. But something in Eliza's expression reminded Jacob of his late wife's determination. Sarah had possessed that same quiet strength, that unwavering belief in doing right, regardless of consequences. Might work. We can discuss terms. Margaret's teacup clinked against its saucer with unusual force. Within a week, Eliza had transformed the dusty storage space into a functional classroom. She scrubbed floors, whitewashed walls, and arranged borrowed furniture into neat rows. The transformation was remarkable. Boomer appeared on the second day, carrying lumber and basic tools. He said nothing about his decision to help. He simply began building proper desks and benches with hands that remembered their craft. His woodworking skills emerged gradually. Each piece he created showed careful attention to detail. Small desks sized for young children, sturdy benches that could support growing bodies, a teacher's podium with subtle decorative touches that spoke of artistic training. Eliza watched him work with growing curiosity. His massive hands moved with surprising delicacy across the wood. Each cut was precise. Each joint fitted perfectly. This was not the work of a simple laborer. "You trained as a craftsman." Boomer's saw paused mid-stroke. Personal questions were dangerous territory after 12 years of solitude. "Had a family once, built furniture for them, toys for the children." The past tense carried weight of unbearable loss. Eliza didn't press for details, but understanding passed between them. They were both rebuilding from ruins of previous lives. Students began arriving in small numbers. The first was Maria Santos, daughter of the Mexican family that ran the stable. Her mother brought her personally, speaking rapid Spanish mixed with broken English about the importance of education. Next came two Seminole children from the settlement outside town. Their grandfather, a man named Joseph Standing Bear, spoke with Eliza in careful English about his hopes for his grandchildren's future in the changing world. Within 2 weeks, she had 7 regular students, all from families existing on Millbrook Creek's social margins. No white children from established families attended, despite several parents expressing private interest. Margaret's opposition intensified as the school gained momentum. She organized a petition demanding the closure of what she termed an unauthorized educational experiment. She questioned Eliza's credentials at every opportunity. She suggested that mixing children from different backgrounds would lead to chaos and moral corruption, but Eliza's educational background proved formidable against such attacks. She had graduated from Oberlin College, one of the few institutions accepting students regardless of race or gender. Her teaching methods reflected progressive training that emphasized individual development over rote memorization. Her students thrived under her guidance. Maria's reading improved dramatically. The Seminole children, already bilingual, quickly mastered written English. Even shy Tommy Williams, whose Irish immigrant parents finally enrolled him despite community pressure, began showing confidence in mathematics. The success drew attention beyond Millbrook Creek's borders. A visiting territorial inspector traveling through on routine business stopped by the school after hearing reports about an unusual educational situation. He observed lessons for an entire morning. Eliza taught geography using real maps, encouraged scientific inquiry through practical experiments, and maintained discipline through respect rather than fear. Her students engaged actively in learning rather than passively receiving information. The inspector's written report praised the school's innovative approach and recommended it as a model for other frontier communities. His endorsement carried official weight that even Margaret Couldengrange could not easily dismiss. But success brought new dangers. Anonymous notes appeared warning Eliza to abandon her efforts. Supplies went missing from the schoolroom. Threatening messages were left where students would find them. Margaret's smile grew sharper as opposition tactics escalated. She had built her power through careful manipulation of social pressures. If gentle methods failed, harsher measures would certainly follow. The question was no longer whether Eliza's school would succeed, but whether she could survive the forces gathering against her. The threats escalated after the territorial inspector's positive report. Someone shattered the schoolroom window during the night. Eliza found her teaching materials scattered across the floor, pages torn from precious books she had carried from Ohio. She began staying later each evening, not wanting her students to see the damage. During these quiet hours, she started examining the school's location more carefully. The building sat on land that should have belonged to the town's development fund. According to old territorial records she found in Jacob's collection, but the deed listed Thomas Whitmore as the owner. This discovery led Eliza to the territorial office in the county seat. She borrowed Jacob's wagon for the day-long journey, claiming she needed supplies for the school. The clerk, an elderly man with ink-stained fingers, helped her search through property records dating back 15 years. The pattern emerged slowly but clearly. Thomas Whitmore had purchased significant parcels throughout Millbrook Creek, using funds that should have gone to infrastructure development. Wells, roads, and public buildings had been planned but never built. The money had simply disappeared into private hands. More disturbing was the timeline. Thomas's largest purchases occurred in the months before his death. Someone with access to town funds had been systematically looting the community's future. Eliza returned to Millbrook Creek with copied documents hidden beneath school supplies. She needed someone who understood the town's history to help interpret what she had found. Boomer had lived there for decades. His 12 years of silent observation might have revealed patterns others missed. She found him in the schoolroom that evening, repairing the broken window. His large hands worked carefully with putty and glass, sealing out the night air. Thomas Whitmore was stealing from the town. Boomer's hands stilled. He had suspected corruption but never possessed proof. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Margaret knew. She had to know. Eliza spread the documents across her desk. Property transfers, fund disbursements, and authorization signatures painted a clear picture of systematic theft. She was his partner. Look at the dates. Every major transaction was approved by both the mayor and the town council treasurer. Boomer studied the papers with growing unease. Margaret had served as council treasurer for over a decade. Her signature appeared on every questionable document. Thomas tried to stop it near the end. See these withdrawal cancellations? Someone was having second thoughts. The evidence suggested a partnership that had turned sour. Thomas's final months showed attempts to reverse previous transactions, to return money to legitimate town projects. But those efforts had ended abruptly with his death. His accident wasn't an accident. The words hung between them like a loaded gun. Murder was a serious accusation, especially against someone as powerful as Margaret Grange. But Boomer's memory held pieces that supported this terrible conclusion. He had been walking past Margaret's house the night before Thomas died. Through her window, he had seen them arguing violently. Thomas had stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. The next morning brought news of Thomas's fatal riding accident. His horse had thrown him on a familiar trail he had ridden safely for years. The animal was found with blood on its flanks, as if it had been struck repeatedly with something sharp. I saw her that night. Saw them fighting. Should have known something was wrong when his horse came back spooked like that. Guilt washed over Boomer's features. 12 years of self-imposed isolation suddenly made horrible sense. He had witnessed evidence of murder and done nothing to seek justice. Eliza placed a gentle hand on his arm. His silence hadn't been cowardice. It had been the paralyzed grief of a man who had already lost everything that mattered to him. We can't prove murder, but we can prove theft. The stolen funds explained much about Millbrook Creek's decline. Money meant for wells had disappeared, leaving families dependent on a single unreliable source. Road improvements had been canceled, isolating the town from trade routes. The planned school building had never been constructed, forcing children to travel dangerous distances for education. Margaret had systematically strangled the community's growth while enriching herself and her partner. When Thomas developed a conscience, she had eliminated the threat to her comfortable arrangement. But exposing the truth carried enormous risks. Margaret wielded significant power through her social connections and accumulated wealth. She could destroy reputations with whispered rumors, ruin businesses through organized boycotts, and drive opponents from town through coordinated pressure. Eliza was already experiencing the beginning of such treatment. Her school's success made her a visible target for someone accustomed to controlling all aspects of community life. She'll come for us next. Can't let this information get out. As if summoned by their conversation, Margaret appeared in the schoolroom doorway. Her usual smile was replaced by cold calculation. She had climbed the stairs silently, moving with predatory patience. Good evening, Miss Montgomery. Mr. Calhoun, working quite late. I see. Neither Eliza nor Boomer moved to hide the documents. The confrontation they had been dreading was finally upon them. Margaret's gaze swept across the scattered papers. Her expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in her eyes. Old property records make for fascinating reading, though one must be careful about drawing conclusions from incomplete information. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Margaret knew exactly what they had discovered. More importantly, she was prepared to act decisively to protect herself. Perhaps Miss Montgomery would benefit from a change of scenery. I understand there are teaching opportunities in California that might better suit her particular talents. The offer contained an ultimatum: leave quietly or face consequences that would extend far beyond her own welfare. Eliza looked at her students' empty desks, at the books and supplies that represented hope for a better future. Margaret was offering her escape, but accepting would abandon everything she had built and everyone who depended on her. The stolen money could rebuild Millbrook Creek properly. The truth could free the community from Margaret's strangling control. But pursuing justice could cost Eliza everything she had worked to achieve. Margaret waited for an answer, her smile returning with predatory confidence. Eliza met Margaret's stare without flinching. The older woman's smile faltered slightly at the unexpected defiance. I think I'll stay. This town needs its school. Margaret's composure cracked for just a moment. Years of unchallenged authority had not prepared her for such direct opposition. You're making a serious mistake. Miss Montgomery, one you'll regret. She turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing down the wooden stairs like a countdown to war. The attack came 3 days later. Eliza arrived at the schoolroom to find a small leather pouch hidden beneath her desk. Inside were 20 gold coins and several pieces of jewelry that belonged to prominent townspeople. Margaret had planted evidence that would brand Eliza as a thief. Within an hour, a crowd gathered outside the saloon. Margaret stood at its center, her voice carrying perfectly calculated outrage about the violation of trust. How could they have welcomed a stranger into their community only to have their generosity repaid with theft? Several victims stepped forward to identify their missing valuables: Mrs. Henderson's pearl brooch, Mr. Patterson's gold pocket watch. Items that had disappeared over recent weeks, now conveniently discovered in the teacher's possession. Jacob watched from his doorway as the crowd's mood turned ugly. He had seen this pattern before during his years in mining camps. Mob justice moved fast and left little room for truth or mercy. Boomer appeared at Eliza's side as she faced the angry townspeople. His massive presence created a small buffer between her and the advancing crowd, but even he could not hold back an entire community bent on vengeance. She's innocent. This is Margaret's work. His words carried no weight against the physical evidence. The stolen items had been found in Eliza's possession. Her denials sounded hollow in the face of such clear proof. The territorial marshal was summoned from the county seat. He would arrive within 2 days to make arrests and conduct a formal investigation. Until then, popular opinion had already reached its verdict. Margaret's victory seemed complete. The troublesome teacher would be removed. The dangerous questions about town finances would die with her credibility, and normal order would be restored. But she had underestimated the bonds Eliza had built with her students and their families. Maria Santos arrived first, her mother close behind. They had heard the accusations and came to offer support. The Seminole children's grandfather, Joseph Standing Bear, appeared next with quiet dignity that commanded respect even from hostile crowds. One by one, the families whose children attended Eliza's school gathered around her. They spoke in multiple languages about her character, her dedication, and her positive impact on their young ones. Their testimony created cracks in the crowd's certainty. Tommy Williams's Irish parents pushed through the mass of people. His father, a blacksmith with powerful arms and an honest face, addressed the assembly directly. This woman taught my boy to read in 3 weeks, gave him confidence he never had before. She's no thief. More voices joined in defense. Parents shared stories of their children's progress, of lessons that went beyond simple reading and writing to include respect, curiosity, and hope for the future. Margaret watched her carefully constructed narrative begin to crumble. She had expected universal condemnation, not this outpouring of support from the community's margins. Jacob made his decision in that moment. He stepped forward from his doorway, his voice cutting through the competing conversations. "I've seen stranger things than planted evidence in my time. Maybe we should wait for the marshal before passing judgment." His words carried weight as a neutral observer and respected businessman. Several people nodded agreement, their certainty shaken by his intervention. But Margaret was not finished. She produced additional evidence that evening. A witness who claimed to have seen Eliza near the Henderson house on the night of the burglary. A pawnshop receipt allegedly found in her room showing the sale of stolen goods. Each new piece of evidence appeared perfectly timed and conveniently discovered. The pattern was too neat, too complete for random chance. Eliza realized she was fighting more than simple accusations. Margaret had orchestrated an elaborate frame designed to destroy her completely. Every detail had been planned, every witness prepared, every piece of evidence manufactured with careful precision. The revelation brought both despair and clarity. Margaret possessed resources and connections that extended far beyond Millbrook Creek. She had built her power through decades of manipulation, corruption, and strategic elimination of threats. But Eliza also possessed advantages Margaret had not considered. Her education included legal training that helped her recognize the flaws in fabricated evidence. Her teaching experience had taught her to identify when children were reciting prepared answers rather than speaking from knowledge. Margaret's witnesses showed the same rehearsed quality as nervous students reciting memorized lessons. More importantly, Eliza's investigation had uncovered Margaret's greatest vulnerability. The stolen town funds represented a fortune that could not be easily hidden or explained away. Physical evidence of that theft still existed in property records and financial documents. The approaching Harvest Festival would bring together the entire community, including officials from neighboring towns and territorial representatives. It would provide a perfect opportunity to present evidence publicly, forcing a reckoning that Margaret could not control or suppress. But they had less than 48 hours before the marshal arrived to make arrests. Once Eliza was in custody, her credibility would be destroyed and her evidence dismissed as the desperate lies of a cornered criminal. Boomer understood the stakes with perfect clarity. He had remained silent for 12 years while injustice flourished. His cowardice had allowed Margaret to consolidate power and eliminate opposition without consequence. Now he faced a choice that would define the remainder of his life. He could retreat once again into protective isolation, or he could find the courage to speak truth regardless of personal cost. The festival began at dawn. Margaret's trap was set, her victory assured. But Eliza and Boomer had their own plans for the day's events. The Harvest Festival transformed Millbrook Creek's dusty Main Street into a celebration of community survival. Families from surrounding settlements gathered to trade goods, share news, and forget their hardships for one precious day. Margaret presided over the festivities like a benevolent queen. She wore her finest dress and moved through the crowds accepting congratulations on maintaining order during recent troubles. Her smile radiated satisfaction at problems soon to be permanently resolved. The territorial marshal had arrived that morning. He sat at a prominent table reviewing Margaret's carefully prepared evidence while enjoying the festival's hospitality. His presence reminded everyone that justice would soon be served. Eliza helped set up the school's display booth, despite whispered hostility from several townspeople. Her students had prepared reading demonstrations and arithmetic competitions to showcase their progress. Their families gathered nearby, creating a protective circle around their embattled teacher. Boomer worked silently beside her, arranging the wooden desks and benches he had crafted. Each piece represented hours of careful labor, physical proof of his commitment to something beyond his own pain. The morning passed with forced normalcy. Children played games while adults conducted business and shared gossip. But tension crackled beneath the surface like lightning before a storm. Margaret chose her moment carefully. As the crowd gathered for the traditional harvest address, she stepped onto the raised platform and called for attention. Her voice carried across the assembled families with practiced authority. She spoke first about community values and the importance of maintaining standards that had served them well for generations. Then she transitioned smoothly to recent events that had threatened their peaceful existence. The planted evidence was displayed for all to see. Stolen jewelry caught the afternoon sunlight like accusations made manifest. Margaret's witnesses stepped forward to repeat their rehearsed testimony about Eliza's suspicious behavior. The crowd's mood shifted predictably. Murmurs of anger rippled through the assembly. Several people called for immediate justice rather than waiting for formal legal proceedings. But Eliza was ready. She stepped onto the platform without invitation, carrying a leather satchel filled with copied documents. Her voice cut through the crowd's growing hostility with calm authority. "Before you judge me, you should know what I've discovered about your town's missing development funds." Margaret's composure flickered for the first time. She had not expected this direct counterattack. Eliza spread the property records across a table where everyone could see them. Her teacher's voice carried clearly as she explained the pattern of systematic theft that had impoverished their community. Wells that were never dug, roads that were never built, a school that was never constructed, all because the allocated funds had been diverted into private pockets through fraudulent land deals. The crowd's attention shifted from the planted jewelry to these more substantial revelations. Several men pushed forward to examine the documents more closely. Their faces showed growing understanding and anger at the deception. Margaret attempted to dismiss the accusations as desperate lies from a cornered criminal, but the official territorial seals on the documents could not be easily explained away. Then Boomer stepped forward. For 12 years, he had remained silent about the night Thomas Whitmore died. Guilt had wrapped around his throat like a noose, choking off his voice and isolating him from human connection. But seeing Eliza's courage gave him strength to finally speak truth. His voice shook at first, rusty from years of disuse. But it grew stronger as he described witnessing the violent argument between Margaret and Thomas on the night before his death. Thomas had discovered the extent of Margaret's embezzlement. He had threatened to expose everything and return the stolen money to its rightful purposes. Their partnership had become a liability she could no longer tolerate. The crowd listened with growing shock as Boomer described finding Thomas's horse the next morning. The animal bore marks from sharp objects, wounds that would have caused it to panic and throw its rider. Margaret's face went pale beneath her powder. She had not known about this witness to her crime. Thomas Whitmore didn't die in an accident. He was murdered to protect this theft. The accusation hit the crowd like a physical blow. Murder was a crime that demanded justice regardless of social position or community standing. Margaret tried to maintain control through sheer force of personality. She had ruled through intimidation and manipulation for so long that direct confrontation felt impossible. But her carefully constructed authority crumbled under the weight of documented evidence and eyewitness testimony. The territorial marshal stepped forward to examine the financial records with professional interest. Other townspeople began connecting patterns they had previously ignored. Margaret's sudden wealth during years of general decline, her opposition to any projects that might benefit the community, her systematic elimination of anyone who questioned her decisions. The stolen funds totaled nearly $10,000, money that could have transformed Millbrook Creek into a thriving community instead of a dying frontier settlement. Jacob produced additional evidence from his own records. Margaret had pressured him repeatedly to refuse service to families she considered undesirable. She had organized boycotts against businesses that defied her wishes. Her control had extended into every aspect of community life. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the collapse of her social support, Margaret made one final desperate attempt to escape consequences. She claimed Thomas had been the mastermind behind the theft. She had merely followed his instructions as a trusted friend trying to help with complex financial matters. His death had been tragic but accidental, the result of their heated discussion about his gambling debts. But the documents told a different story. Margaret's signature appeared on transactions that predated Thomas's involvement by years. She had been systematically looting town funds since taking her position as treasurer. The territorial marshal placed Margaret under arrest for embezzlement and suspicion of murder. The planted evidence against Eliza was revealed as another layer in Margaret's web of deception. As Margaret was led away, her mask of genteel authority finally slipped completely. The woman who had terrorized Millbrook Creek through social manipulation stood revealed as nothing more than a common criminal who had betrayed the trust of everyone around her. The Harvest Festival continued, but its character had changed completely. Instead of celebrating survival, the community began planning for renewal built on truth rather than comfortable lies. 1 year later, Millbrook Creek bore little resemblance to the dying frontier town that had greeted Eliza's arrival. The recovered funds had transformed empty lots into thriving businesses. New wells provided clean water to every household. Properly graded roads connected the community to regional trade routes that brought prosperity and opportunity. The most dramatic change stood at the town's center. A proper schoolhouse rose from foundations where weeds had once grown, its white-painted walls gleaming in the morning sun. Bell tower, wide windows, and a playground where children's laughter echoed throughout the day marked it as a place of learning and hope. Eliza stood at the front of her new classroom, watching 32 students work quietly at their lessons. Children from every family in Millbrook Creek and the surrounding settlements filled the neat rows of desks. White, Mexican, Seminole, Irish, and German voices blended together in recitation and discussion. The Territorial Education Board had appointed her as the official district teacher following Margaret's trial and conviction. Her methods, once considered radical and dangerous, had been adopted as models for frontier education throughout the region. Boomer appeared in the doorway carrying a wooden cradle he had crafted for the newest addition to the Williams family. His carpentry business thrived as the town's growth created demand for quality furniture and construction. More importantly, his woodworking had evolved from simple utility into genuine artistry that brought joy to both creator and recipient. The transformation in his demeanor was as dramatic as the town's physical changes. 12 years of self-imposed isolation had ended the moment he chose to speak truth at the Harvest Festival. His voice, once rusty from disuse, now served as the school's volunteer storyteller and occasional substitute teacher. Children who had initially feared his imposing size now gathered eagerly around his workbench after school. He taught them patience and precision through simple carpentry projects while sharing stories of his own childhood and the values his parents had tried to instill. The healing process had not been easy. Confronting his guilt over Thomas Whitmore's murder had required months of painful self-examination. But speaking truth had lifted a weight he had carried for too long. Purpose had returned to his days, along with human connection he had thought lost forever. Jacob's saloon had evolved into something resembling a town hall where community decisions were made through open discussion rather than Margaret's former autocratic control. Evening meetings brought together families from all backgrounds to plan improvements and resolve disputes through democratic process. The territorial trial had revealed the full extent of Margaret's crimes. Beyond the embezzlement and murder, she had systematically destroyed opportunities for anyone who threatened her control. Businesses had failed, families had left town, and entire development projects had been sabotaged to maintain her power. Her conviction brought a 20-year prison sentence that would likely extend until her death. But more importantly for Millbrook Creek, it had freed the community from fear of retribution for pursuing positive changes. The recovered funds had been carefully allocated through community meetings where every family had a voice in spending decisions. Wells and roads received first priority, followed by the school construction that had been Margaret's greatest fear. A lending program helped establish new businesses that served the growing population. The general store expanded its inventory. A proper blacksmith shop replaced Tommy Williams's father's makeshift operation. A small bank opened to serve farmers and ranchers throughout the region. Most significantly, the community had learned to value diversity rather than fear it. Children who had been excluded from Margaret's social hierarchy now played together without consciousness of the barriers that had once seemed insurmountable. Joseph Standing Bear's grandchildren excelled in their studies and served as bridges between the Seminole settlement and the town proper. Maria Santos had become Eliza's assistant teacher, helping younger students while preparing for her own advanced education. Tommy Williams showed remarkable aptitude for mathematics that would eventually earn him a scholarship to Territorial College. The annual Harvest Festival had grown into a regional celebration that drew visitors from hundreds of miles away, but its character remained rooted in genuine community rather than Margaret's artificial social performance. Eliza found herself at the center of this transformed celebration, no longer an outsider seeking acceptance, but a respected leader whose vision had helped guide the town's rebirth. Families competed to host her for dinner. Parents sought her advice on their children's futures. Young women looked to her as an example of possibilities they had never imagined. Yet the change she treasured most was visible every afternoon in the saloon where her journey had begun. Boomer still sat at his corner table for the evening meal, but the table was no longer empty. Students joined him to share their daily accomplishments. Parents stopped by to discuss their children's progress. Visiting travelers found themselves welcomed into conversations about literature, history, and ideas that had once seemed foreign to frontier life. The table had become a symbol of inclusion rather than isolation. Its transformation mirrored the community's evolution from fear-based exclusion to hope-driven welcome. On the anniversary of her arrival, Eliza sat across from Boomer at that same table. Between them lay the original forged letters that had brought her to Millbrook Creek. She had framed Thomas Whitmore's correspondence as a reminder that deception could sometimes lead to unexpected truth. Through the saloon windows, they could see children playing in the schoolyard while their parents conducted business along streets that bustled with prosperity. The dying town had become a model of frontier success built on principles of justice, education, and mutual respect. A new stagecoach arrived as the sun set behind distant mountains. Another young woman stepped down, carrying a carpet bag and looking around with hope and uncertainty. Eliza stood to greet her, remembering her own arrival and the courage it had taken to sit down uninvited at a stranger's table. That simple act of determination had changed not just her own life, but an entire community's future. Sometimes the smallest gestures carried the greatest power to transform the world.